All right, today we're diving into a theory that's going to flip your whole understanding of reality right on its head. It's called single point theory, and it makes a pretty wild claim that the universe isn't a place filled with things, but is actually a single, ongoing process. So let's see how that could possibly work. So let's start with the central question here. We tend to think of the universe as this huge, empty container, space-time, that's filled with stuff like stars and galaxies. But what if that's completely backward? What if space, time, and even matter aren't the fundamental ingredients at all? What if they're just side effects of something much, much simpler? This slide really gets to the heart of the whole idea. On the left, you've got the view we all kind of grew up with. The universe is made of static objects sitting in a place. But on the right, you have this radical new idea. Reality is a dynamic process. The objects and even the place itself aren't fundamental. They're emergent. They bubble up out of the process itself. Okay, so to really wrap our heads around this, we have to start with the first big hurdle. We need to let go of the idea that the universe is a place at all. And, this isn't as totally out there as it might sound. If you look at the history of physics, we've kind of been heading in this direction for a while. We went from ancient ideas of static elements, earth, air, fire, to much more dynamic concepts like quantum and electromagnetic fields. This theory just says we need to take that one final logical step to realize that everything is pure process. So if the universe isn't a place that started with a Big Bang, then how did it begin? Well, this theory suggests a completely different origin story, and it all revolves around something called a voxel. Now, it's really important to get this. A voxel is not a thing. It's an event. It's the smallest possible happening you can have. It doesn't exist in space or time, because at this point, space and time don't even exist yet. It's just a single, pure instance of process. And this one little event is the seed that the entire universe grows from. And to really get it, it's just as crucial to understand what a voxel isn't. It's not a particle. It's definitely not the hot, dense singularity from the Big Bang. It has no temperature, no density, and no location. It's the complete opposite of the Big Bang's starting point. Not maximum chaos, but absolute, perfect simplicity. Okay, so we start with one single voxel. How in the world do you get from that one little event to, well, all of this? A universe full of galaxies and stars and us? The answer is an engine that's incredibly simple, but also unbelievably powerful: recursion. So, get this. The theory says the universe has a fundamental clock speed, like a universal refresh rate, and that rate is the Planck frequency. I mean, look at that number. That's a 1 with 43 zeros after it. That's how many ticks happen every single second. It's almost impossible to imagine. And at every single one of those ticks, the universe's engine runs one simple step. And here's that process. It's a simple loop. At every tick of that universal clock, a new voxel is born. Then it gets placed into the structure that already exists, in the spot where it fits best, the path of least resistance, you could say. And then it just repeats. That's it. That one simple rule is the engine that builds everything. The universe literally grows itself, one event at a time. This is where the magic really happens. If the universe is just this simple, repeating process, where does all the familiar stuff come from? Space, time, matter. Well, they aren't put in at the beginning. They emerge from the growing complexity of the pattern. First step, time. In this model, time isn't some river that we're all floating down. It's just the universe's step counter. Tick 1 is the first moment, tick 2 is the second moment, and so on. The arrow of time we all feel is just the process chugging forward. It's more like a count than a dimension. And space? This one's a real mind-bender. Space isn't an empty box that the voxels get put into. Space is the network of connections between the voxels. As the structure grows and grows, a stable geometric pattern of relationships forms, and that pattern is what we perceive as three-dimensional space. The container actually emerges from the contents. And here is the big payoff. As you can see here, everything we know and love just emerges as a stable pattern in this voxel field. An electron, that's just a stable harmonic loop. A proton is just a more complicated one. Forces, that's just how these patterns affect each other. And gravity, wow. Gravity is just an effect of amplitude bias. Think of it like patterns with low frequency amplitude creating a sort of dent that attracts patterns with high frequency, kind of like how mass warps spacetime. But this raises a really interesting question. If reality is just this fleeting, flickering process, why does the world feel so solid, so real? To answer that, the theory introduces something called the agreement framework. I absolutely love this quote from the source material. The illusion of solid matter is coherence, not essence. The rock you can hold in your hand feels solid, not because it has some deep, unchanging rockness to it, but because the underlying pattern of voxels that makes it up is just incredibly coherent and stable over time. It's all about the persistence of the pattern. So what we call an object is really just a label, a mental shortcut for a pattern that's stable enough for us to perceive and give it a name. We all just agree that this persistent pattern is a chair, and that shared agreement is what makes it feel so real to us. Our reality is basically built on consensus. So, what does this all mean when we put it side by side with the standard model of the universe we're all familiar with? Well, the differences are pretty profound. The differences are just stark. The Big Bang starts with maximum chaos, a hot, dense, high-entropy mess. Single-point theory starts with perfect simplicity, a single voxel with zero entropy. In the standard model, space expands. Here, space grows. And maybe the biggest deal of all, this approach just neatly solves the fine-tuning problem. You don't need these perfect, magical initial conditions, because all the complexity just evolves naturally from one simple rule. So let's just recap the huge ideas here. First, nothing is really static. Reality is a process, and what seems solid is just a very stable pattern. Second, the entire universe builds itself from one single repeating rule. And finally, this means our most fundamental concepts, time, space, and matter, they aren't the building blocks at all. They're just features that emerge from the system. And that leaves us with one final, absolutely mind-bending question from the people behind this theory. If our shared reality is built on our agreement about these external patterns, could consciousness itself be a similar kind of phenomenon? An internal agreement, a feedback loop that's observing and reinforcing its own patterns. It's a provocative thought, right at the edge of physics and philosophy. Thanks for watching.